Welcome to my talk. I'm going to talk about how to get a job at the Big Four. Specifically, when I say Big Four, I mean Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon. Most of the advice that you're going to hear today, it honestly applies for like any company that's in Silicon Valley. However, I just kind of wanted to give it a name. And yeah, my name is Tom. I'm a fourth year EECS major. And yeah, I'm a webmaster here at ACM, and some of you guys have seen me around. And yeah. So disclaimer. Oh, I can't even click. Disclaimer, I actually don't represent any of the companies that you're gonna hear about today. I may have worked for them, but my opinions are my own. And yeah, and then ACM is also not affiliated with any of these organizations. And yeah, so just anything you hear today, it's honestly all my own ideas. Yeah. So first thing, a little bit about me. When I started school in 2020, I didn't have any experience coming into college. I looked at Python, Java, C++, and I was kind of like, what are those? And once I actually like started developing and learning stuff like 162, 161, I realized that there's actually a lot more to CS than just pointers. And yeah, so the past like 3 years, 4 years, I've been really blessed to have a great set of experience with web development specifically, but really just everything as a whole. And I'm always like curious to learn more. And yeah. And so with the Big Four, it's one of those things that's kind of taboo to talk about. You guys have all heard like the people like FANG sexuals, and the people are like, oh, if you don't get a FANG offer, you're like a joke. But I really thought that like this talk would be important because there's no like single source guide where people are talking about how to get a job in tech. It's always like you'll hear it from the companies, maybe someone on Reddit or something random like that. But I wanted to give like an unfiltered, unbiased, kind of like students' perspective on how to get a job at one of these companies. And you're probably wondering like why the Big Four in the first place. So the first thing is of course like the career development, your team, your manager, like the stuff you're working on. You're working on applications that touch millions of people every day. And then I also talk about the 3 Ps. So like the perks, think like free food, the pay. I made like $81 an hour, and then the prestige, so that like your parents can brag about you on Facebook. And then I actually have like a meme there, like memeing students on LinkedIn. They're like, I'm excited to announce that I'm better than you. And yeah, and then also like the networking. During these like internships, full-time offers, you're surrounded by people your age in college. So I've been able to meet people from Stanford, Berkeley, Caltech, and just really all over the globe. And it's super powerful, not even just like as a engineer, but specifically an entry-level engineer. And here's some of like the photos that I took throughout the years. Discord is not a FANG company, but I just included there anywhere because we love Discord. And so I was talking about career development. I want to bring back that point. So whenever you're like looking for a full-time job, if you have an internship, that's really like the best way to get that interview, because you have like an internship at like one of the Big Four. It's like, I'm this good. It's a stamp of approval on your resume. And then also there's like a snowball effect. So when my freshman year, when I got an offer at Google, it was kind of one of those things that once I got that offer, every year after, it kind of snowballed into like Amazon, Discord, Facebook, etc. And so that's why it's really important to do it not only early, but often, and just apply. And then vouching and networking. So whenever you get like one of these jobs in tech and the Big Four, you have like people that of course are from around the world, like I mentioned, and they're able to vouch for you. So if they go to a different company, they could be like, oh, I interned with him, so let's give him an offer or an interview. And then also like we love the resume bonus as well. And then the hard truth is that it's honestly just not as easy now. Back in the day, it's like, I know you guys remember like 2020, we were almost in like a bubble with tech, but recently it's kind of just like companies are pushing back and not hiring as much, but yeah. And more on that point where it's not as easy now. We've all seen the day in the life, the free food, the jokes. We've seen all that, and it's not really representative of a job in tech, especially at the Big Four. And we see that like demand is at an all-time low, supply is at an all-time high. Like we have CS is the largest engineering major here at OSU. And then also like the top students for all the jobs. I don't want to say I'm a top student, but I do collect offers and like not plan on taking them. So that just like further solidifies that point. And then the pipelines are already established. So like I said, throughout like 2020 to now, there was a bubble. And they had these pipelines of like students. Okay, let's reach out to them if we have a job opening. And now that there's like pipelines of like intern to new grad, there's not necessarily space for other people to come in and like get those jobs. So that's why we actually, as OSU students, we have to work extra hard to get these jobs. And I have a figure here which shows the UC Berkeley freshman admissions. You can actually see that it's getting exponential, how many people are enrolling and applying. And that just like further solidifies it. And then if you don't believe me, I pulled some figures from the internet. So this is big tech / FANG relative to their all-time high. You can see that Netflix is down $143 billion. And then here we have the change in degrees from 2011 to 2021. As we see, computer science has the most degrees being given. And then here on the right, we see that CS is actually on the verge of passing all humanities degrees. And this is just degrees awarded. And that just shows that in this market, especially, you have to really find a way to separate yourself. And it all seems doom and gloom, but we'll get to the positive part soon. But despite all of this, despite everything I said, despite the market being bad, despite tech on hiring freezes, despite there being thousands and thousands of people applying every day, there's still a way. And I kind of sum it up in a two-step process. So I like to say it's really simple. There's a two-step process to getting any of these jobs at the Big Four. It's specifically getting the interview and then passing the interview. And I never said it's easy, but it is very simple. And yeah, so the first step, getting the interview. Yes, this is the hardest part. I'll admit that. I know it's honestly almost luck is 90% of it, but there are a few ways that you can like use to further solidify or further get yourself that opportunity to get an interview. And one of the things is having a concise resume, of course. So let's look at my resume. So whenever you're like building a resume, you have to understand that the first impression is everything. Whenever they see your resume, they're only spending on average around like 6 to 8 seconds. So you really have to make sure that you have all the keywords, you have all the metrics, you have all the impact, you have everything to show that you're qualified for these jobs. And specifically, let's take a look at my experience. So I did an off-season internship during the fall through like spring-ish at a small tech recruiting company called Bounty Jobs. But you can see that I actually have specific metrics showing that how I impacted the organization. So you can see I like said 12% faster. I saved us $3,600. Stuff like that actually matters because it's like, okay, if he made this organization better, could he do that for me? And then you can see below, I have my project. This is Talk to Bees. I actually made a social media app for OSU, shameless plug. But yeah, even though with projects, it's not easy to get like those metrics like I have above in my experience, you could still capture the essence of the project and like the technologies you used without necessarily having all the biggest metrics. And then I always recommend putting a GitHub repository link. No one really cares about like the date that you worked on that project. Like I worked on this like a year ago almost. And then also I recommend always putting the technology in line. So right next to the either work experience or the project itself. So you can see I put WebRTC, React, etc. And let's continue taking a look at my resume. So specifically my skills in education. So for OSU, I don't have the highest GPA. Quite frankly, I actually have a 2.7. So, and that takes, it's funny because people are always like, Tom, how did you get 3 FANG offers? How did you do this? I'm like, I kind of sacrificed school. But because of that, I've had opportunities to do stuff and like showcase my skills. So with your skills section, I always recommend keeping it brief. Surprisingly enough, I actually do know that many things. But with that, it's kind of just, you want to have as much relevance to the role that you're applying to as possible. With me, since I have such a breadth-based experience, I kind of just put everything that I know and then assume that if I get asked it, I can, of course, perform to the level. And then for education, I really just put that I'm, of course, like the president of the Oregon State University App Development Club, and then webmaster of ACM and Linux Users Group. And because like they see those titles, it kind of has like an implicit like, oh, man, he's leading an organization with 500 members. Maybe he actually is something. So I always recommend putting stuff like that. If you're active on campus, it doesn't even have to be CS adjacent, but if it's something like, oh, I lead the African Student Association, that could still be enough to get you that interview. And then another thing is working on projects. So projects are one of those things that OSU kind of shafted us in the way that, like how many of you are taking Engineering 103 or Engineering 10X? Holy crap. Yeah, so OSU's kind of changed it recently where now you're not actually getting into the CS classes as fast as you would be before. So I really projects is one of those things that like come to the scene because of that. And specifically with projects, I said don't use projects from courses, but take that with like a grain of salt. I mean, don't use the exact project that you submitted on the day of the deadline. I mean, more so maybe extend it in some way, maybe add an API integration, maybe use like a database. That's what I mean by don't use projects from courses. And then also making sure that it's like relevant and that you like it. You're not going to finish the project you don't like. That's just how we are as humans. So I always recommend doing something that you actually like and enjoy. And that actually leads me to my next point, which is the best way, in my opinion, to make projects. And that is hackathons. So hackathons are really just a time-constrained environment where you build a project. I had the honor of actually getting first place with my team right here at Cal Hacks just 2 days ago. And that was an extremely fun time. I've been at MIT for a hackathon that they hold every year. And then also Oregon State University, we have Beaver Hacks, which is held every term. So I always recommend hackathons as a way to get experience, build projects. Funnily enough, we actually took this photo in here. But yeah, and Adrian was there too. Thanks for coming.
I think I took the photo too.
Oh, you did take that photo, yeah. And yeah, I always recommend hackathons because not only is it like a great way to build a project in a short amount of time, but it helps you work in groups. It helps you experience not only conflict, but also like growth. Because in a technical or a behavioral interview, they may ask you, tell me about a time you had a conflict. Hackathons usually like we're sleepless, tired. So sometimes there is like conflicts and stuff like that. And I always bring up hackathons when they ask me those type of questions. It helps a ton. And then there's another underrated part of hackathons is that the networking aspect. Like after we got first place at Cal Hacks, we got invited to an after party with literally a CEO of a startup. So if you go to hackathons and perform well, not even if you perform well, but just in general, you'll be able to network with the people that you actually need to meet these jobs at the Big Four. And then there's more. So assuming you've done everything right up to this point, you've made the projects, you've went to the hackathons and performed well, you have a great resume, you should have an interview at this point. So the next step is, of course, passing the interview. And it's really, the passing the interview is actually, quite frankly, the easiest part. Because of course, getting the interview is 90% out of your control. You have to let like a recruiter take you in, be like, oh, should we hire him? He doesn't go to Princeton, etc. But with passing the interview, that's all under your control. So this is where, quite frankly, where things get serious. A lot of people, especially me, when I was early on in my experience, like freshman year, I failed a lot of interviews. It's just, life is like that. But one thing I recommend is always like brush up on your technical skills, preparing a set of stories that fit the STAR method. So that's situation, task, action, and result. So you can say like something like, I built this API that added 10,000 users with X, Y, and Z. And then what happened out of that. And then also doing mock interviews, I highly recommend that. Peter, I actually have a YouTube channel dedicated to that. Welcome. I have a YouTube channel dedicated to doing mock interviews. So if you can possibly make some friends within your classes and do mock interviews together, that's a great way to make sure that you can actually pass these interviews at the Big Four. And then also like asking great questions, be a good person. You know, some people, especially in CS, it's kind of like a joke that no one like touches grass per se, but I highly recommend like going outside, go to that party so you can like talk to people that aren't like you and actually be like a person who can hold the conversation. And then also if you're like recruiting any seniors, if you're recruiting for a new grad, I recommend system design because they'll ask you more on like, how do you design this API, etc. And then also just like understanding the interview processes. So like certain companies have like very like different processes. But one thing about the Big Four is that if you understand how to get an offer at Google, you can get an offer at Microsoft because they're really not that different at the end of the day. And one thing to note about like the Big Four and interviewing there is that, let's say you know like Java, you're like one of the greatest Java programmers in the world. They'll have a role for you. Let's say you know Ruby and a little bit of Python. They'll have a role for you. Let's say you know Haskell and they don't have a role for you. They quite frankly might make a role for you. And the reason is because at an entry-level position, there's no reason to differentiate between like an entry-level engineer and like an iOS developer. So that's another great perk about the Big Four, because even if you know like one thing, they'll find a way to integrate you. And that's why I always recommend it. Because with startups, especially when I did like an internship at Discord, they really cared about like my React experience. How good am I at front-end development? So it's one of those things that if you think that you have like a general set of skills, I highly recommend the Big Four. Let's do an example. So has anyone done, I assume this is ACM, we've done code forces, we've done leak code. Cool. So I'm actually about to go through like a simple example, but yeah, I'm probably gonna also ask questions. But yeah, here's the question. Given an integer target and then an array nums, return the two indices such that they add up to target. So this is like one of the first like leak code data structure algorithms type problem you ever solved. And then here we can see we're given an array with some integers, a fixed size array, and then we're given a target as well. So 2 and 9 equals 11, and then we output the indices, which is 0 and 4. How would we solve this? Any questions or any response? How would we solve it?
2 for loops, and then keep on looping over all the numbers until you find ones that add up the target, and then you return that. And I would go with this as a starting point, just because you don't want to do premature optimization.
Okay. Thank you. That was a great idea. You?
Using hash map.
Hash map. Okay. Nice. Great answers. So do you guys remember 261? I know we have a lot of freshmen in here, but this is our data structures class. It feels like so long ago, actually. I'm a senior now, so it's been a while. But you really want to remember those data structures that are very key to solving problems. And it's funny because you don't want to think of a data structure as like the answer. You want to think of it as like a tool, a part of like your toolbox. So you have like arrays if you need something with like fixed memory, or contiguous memory. You have trees if you have something that's nonlinear. So really just think of them as tools, especially when you get a question like this. They're trying to see essentially how do you handle that ambiguity. And then also before even like starting to type on the code, like Adrian had a great answer, Im Young had a great answer. However, like you don't really want to just go straight into the code and start doing these 2 for loops or doing this hash map. You really just want to ask the interviewer as much questions as possible to understand how you should actually solve the problem. So does anyone have any questions that we could possibly ask?
How fast are we gonna? How fast does it need to be done?
Okay.
What size of list are we expecting that this would run on?
Okay. Any other?
How big can like the target number?
Sick.
Am I currently being tied up with the grand piano like over my head? And do I have to solve this in 30 seconds, or will it fall on me?
Sick. Awesome. Great answers, guys. But yeah, so those are some of the type of questions that you want to ask before coding. Because at the end of the day, if you do the best problem ever, you have the craziest solution, it's O of n time constant or whatever. If it's not the solution that the interviewer wants, you could still fail. You could still get rejected, even though you on paper solve the question. So you really want to ask these clarifying questions to make sure that you're on the same page as the interviewer and that you, of course, can get that offer at the Big Four. So, of course, like Adrian mentioned, this is the brute force method. We just use like standard iteration, 2 for loops to get all possible pairs of numbers and then find the target sum. So this is just JavaScript or TypeScript actually. But yeah, so once I get the 2 indices that add up the target, I return the indices. And then does anyone know how we could possibly optimize this?
In the first loop, instead of immediately looking for it, first check if the number that you need to add to I to get to the target is even in motion.
Great, yeah, so handling that edge case, right? Nice. Any other?
You can make sure if I is greater than the target. First.
If I is greater than the target?
Well, if I is greater than the target, then you don't have to run the second for loop because unless there's negative numbers.
Yeah, so that actually goes back to like those clarifying questions that we'd ask. You'd ask, oh, is there negative numbers in the input? Welcome, guys. And yeah, so thanks for the answers. Oh.
For each number, map target minus that number to itself, and then like look that up in the hash table afterwards or something like that. I haven't fully formulated this yet.
No, awesome. That was actually exactly the answer. So on this next slide, this is the optimal solution. So we use a data structure, like I mentioned, a tool to solve these problems, to store and basically remember the previously seen values. And then because we have those values, we can compute the complement, which is just the number minus the current indice, and then use the target if we see that. And yeah, so it's funny because even if you coded the solution, like I said before, if the interviewer wanted it like, okay, what if the input array is sorted? And then you wanted like a different type of question, you won't even get it right. So I can't stress that enough, that you want to always make sure you're on the same page as the person interviewing you for these type of jobs. And honestly, even outside the Big Four, it is relevant. So a common question with a question this easy is to get a follow-up. So they're not just going to ask you one question, you finish it 30 minutes early, and then you guys just like pay patty cake or something. What they're going to do is, of course, give you a follow-up. How do you take an extra constraint, an extra requirement? So does anyone know of any follow-ups that we could possibly ask for this question? No one.
What if the array is sorted?
Nice. Were you going to say that too?
Yeah, I was copying there.
Awesome. So yeah, let's use that as a follow-up. So a common follow-up for this question is, if the array is sorted, what exactly would you do? I also put other common follow-ups for this question too below. Find 3 numbers. That's a whole different problem too, called threesome, but you guys get the idea. And yeah, so whenever they give us like a follow-up like that, I'm just like, say less. Keep giving them to me, because then I'll just solve it. So the solution for that, of course, since we know the array is sorted, we can of course like use the entire array, have one pointer at the front, one pointer at the back, move them in, and then we're just checking on each iteration, what is the sum? If the target sum is, of course, the current sum is equal to the target, then we just return those 2 indices. And yeah, so it really shows the power of like clarification, understanding the requirements, making sure you're on the same page with the interviewer, because then you can actually get this offer and actually pass the interview. Because I can't tell you the amount of times that I've like had an interview, I thought it went great, but because I didn't do the solution that the interviewer wanted, I of course got rejected. And now I kind of just want to talk about like my experience. So I've mostly been talking about like a generalization of the Big Four and how you can succeed and get offers there, etc. But I kind of want to talk specifically about my experiences as an OSU student trying to interview at these companies and get these offers. So the first thing is that there's a ton of useful resources out there. We're in a new era, 2023. There's a bunch of places that you can, of course, prepare for these interviews, prepare for these behavioral interviews. My favorites are, of course, LeetCode, Hacker Inc., NeetCode.io, which is relatively new, and Algo Expert. And then if you're caring more about like the companies themselves, I recommend levels.fyi because it has a list of all the pays of the internships. And it's huge because you'll see at like the top of the levels FYI, like 150 an hour. So it's really, it's almost like a motivation factor when you see that, oh, I can make $150 an hour as a college student. Why don't I try doing that? And then other thing is that, like I mentioned before, mock interviews are king. How many people have done a mock interview before? Okay, a few of you. But I bet like the mock interview helped you, did it not? It helped you, exactly. So with mock interviews, the big thing is that you wanna not only like find people to do them with you, but you wanna make sure that you're playing the other side. So like you're the interviewer. So you can see how people think, because when you're on the other side of an interview, you actually completely think of it differently. You're like, maybe they're going down the wrong path. So because of that, mock interviews are super important to your success. And they help you not only just think better as an engineer, but also see things that like from another side that you wouldn't before. And then it goes back to the point I mentioned earlier. If the recruiter, or not the recruiter, if the engineer has a different solution in mind than the one you do, you could still fail. And yeah, this is just my YouTube channel, shameless plug. I do mock interviews all the time. So if you guys want a mock interview, just you know where to find me. And then another thing is at OSU, we're kind of in a different system. So most of my friends, especially since I'm from Orlando, Florida, they're in semester systems. But on the West Coast, a lot of schools are on the quarter system. Because of that, that means that you can actually do an internship during school, like theoretically. So in a few months, I'm actually going to be traveling to Palo Alto, California to intern at Tesla. And that's only because I go to OSU, honestly. Because at OSU, we have not only do we have an e-campus, meaning you could take schools virtually, but we also have a system where, because we're taking about 4 times 4, about like 16 classes a year versus like the 8 with the semester system, you can actually graduate early. So that's like the type of thing that fall internships open up. And then some of the common companies that do these fall internships, at least around the Big Four, is Apple, Tesla, Amazon, and Google. And I highly recommend that if you're trying to do a fall internship, because they're not only a great way to get like experience like a regular internship, but because it's in the fall, it's actually less competitive, quite frankly. Because when I was interning at Amazon over the summer, there was like 15,000 interns. But in the fall, there's only like 800. So you're not competing with as much college students. And since we go to OSU, of course, highly recommend. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the talk, honestly. thank you guys for having me. I don't really talk that much in public besides my clubs, but feel free to connect with me on my socials. I go by New Matt on like everything except for Instagram, and check out my website. And yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Which internship was your favorite?
Ooh, that's a crazy question. It depends. It's kind of like a two-factor answer in the sense that my most like fun internship was when I was at Amazon, but that's because I was in person. Like I flew out to Sunnyvale, California, which is just like right outside Stanford. I flew out there. I spent 3 months there. I lived there, and being in San Francisco is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I had a lot of fun there. But in regards to like work and like the project, the team, etc., of course, like Discord was the best. It's not even close. And that's just because at Discord, it was like a startup. So we like move fast and break things. We ship a lot. Also being on like a platform like Discord that I use every day, it felt amazing. So yeah, great question.
Where would you want it to be most?
Want to enter most in the future? That's a great question. Because I'm like first gen, I come from like of course, that type of background. I'd probably go for like, of course, the highest paying. So Jane Street, HRT. So really just wherever I can get the most money. But I don't recommend just like looking at an internship just for like the money, because at the end of the day, like the work does matter. You don't want to hate your life, but be making $80 an hour. And yeah. Question?
Yeah, you're talking about how like hackathons are, but I'm just wondering like, what's the best way to find these?
Find these hackathons. So there's actually a website called Devpost. I highly recommend checking it out. So if you type in devpost.com, this is basically like the home of all hackathons ever. So you can see that I did Cow Hacks and then Beaver Hacks Hack Education. So I recommend going on the site, looking at all the hackathons. There's a bunch of virtual ones too as well. And yeah, you really just need a team of like 1 to 4 people and you're pretty much good to go. But yeah, Devpost is great. Question?
How do you ask for referrals?
How do you ask for referrals? So with referrals, it kind of goes back to that point earlier. So like, go to that party, be friends with that person. It's one of those things that if you ask for a referral without like knowing the person, they're almost kind of like shun you off. So you want to make sure that you're in like a situation where you can actually ask for it. So this means like probably going to a conference together, going to like a party and a frat, or maybe just like seeing them on the street and just like talking for 30 minutes. So you never really want to ask for a referral out of the blue. Like I do not recommend going on LinkedIn and asking people that are like 3 connections away if I can have a referral. But yeah, so I recommend just, of course, being in places where you can ask it without it being weird. Good question.
What's your dream job?
My dream job? Probably nothing in tech. I'd actually like to teach band. I'm in like the music background. I actually was gonna go to UW for a clarinet performance, but I ended up coming here instead to pursue CS because I don't want to be making 40K a year. But yeah, so that's my dream job, not even in tech. Any other questions? Email?
How many hours do you usually spend on this code?
On lead code per week? That's a crazy question. Now since I've kind of like settled with Tesla, I got rejected from Notion. I kind of just like, okay, I already know what I'm doing. So I kind of stopped. But over the summer, I was spending like 5 to 6 hours per day on lead code. And that's a very high number, but I don't recommend that for everyone because you will burn out fast. But if you want to get good, it's one of those things that you kind of have to lock in, because the big thing about lead code, it evens the playing field. Even though we're competing against students from like the likes of Stanford, Berkeley, Caltech, if you're good at lead code, you can still, it trumps everything almost. So I highly recommend like putting in the time, putting in the dedication to like get good at lead code, because getting good at lead code for me at least, and being an ACM and being active, it almost put me in a place where like I can go into an interview knowing I'll pass it. And like barring, of course, like if I don't get the question that the interviewer wanted, but that's one of those things that I highly recommend putting in the time to lead code so you can, of course, go into an interview knowing you can pass it. Question? Oh, well.
Do you have any tips on prioritizing your time spent on projects versus polishing your resume portfolio or on lead code?
Yeah, polishing. Okay, so like where to put the focus?
How do you prioritize your time? Do you have any tips on?
I see. A big thing for me is no sleep, quite frankly. But I highly recommend. It's almost like a waterfall effect. So like, of course, what are you going to put on your resume if you have no projects? So it's like you want to work on the projects first. Once you're getting interviews, remember the 2-step process: get the interview, resume, projects, etc. Pass the interview, lead code, talking to people, etc. So it's really just you want to make sure you're not only just dividing your time, but making sure it's well spent. Because if you're doing like a bunch of leak code problems, but not actually like learning anything, that's honestly worse off than not doing leak code at all. And yeah, great question.
Would you recommend any other routes, as far as like getting the interview other than projects, like undergrad research or other avenues? of getting-
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you qualify for MECOP, I highly recommend that program. It's a great system. Unfortunately, though, MECOP does shaft some people. Like it's almost like a draft system. So I recommend MECOP. Research is also another good thing. TAing for a class, specifically like if you're gonna TA, I recommend like a data structures and algorithm class because that's of course what the interview is on. So if you're TAing for data structures and algorithms, the interview in theory should be like pretty easy. So that's like what I recommend. He had his hand up first.
Do you have any recommendations for freshman internships?
Freshman internships, that's a great question. So with me, that's actually how I got an internship at Google freshman year. So I did the Google STEP program, which is a underclassmen internship for underrepresented people in tech. But I recommend looking on GitHub. They have repositories with lists of like hundreds of internships specifically for freshmen. So that's a great way to not only like find an internship, but also to connect with like other people. Because freshman is usually when like most CS majors exist. A lot of people drop off over time. So especially when if you want to separate yourself, get an internship freshman year. Because it goes back to that snowball effect I said. Once you get one internship, it's like then more companies are hitting you up and etc. Great question though. Oh, he had his hand up first, actually. Sorry.
Besides hackathons, how do you come up with ideas for personal projects?
How do you come up with ideas for personal projects? That's a great question. So a big thing about like me is I actually don't like working on projects alone, unless it's like a super small toy app. So usually I just do stuff in groups. Like we went to the hackathon at Cal Hacks, we went to Hack MIT. For a final project, I took a course called CS494 Advanced Web Development with Rob S. In the final project and CS290, you have to work in a group. So I recommend just like having friends. That's like the best way. Just have people that are similar to you in tech and work on projects with them because then you don't have to have the burden of like thinking of everything. And yeah. Sorry, man.
I'm pretty sure that Google Step is due tonight, just FYI.
Oh yeah, Google Step closes tonight. Apply tonight if you want an internship at Google.
It's just a resume.
Just a resume. Awesome. Thanks for saying that because you never know. Question? Mhm.
What kinds of projects do you think that?
What kinds of projects do I think are valuable? A big thing with projects is that a project, even if it's like on paper a terrible project, a project that not only has users, but also like makes you happy that you can talk about in an interview is super important. Because I've had interviewers ask me about projects where like I almost made it like resume driven development and like it goes bad every time. So you really want to make sure that all your projects are something that like you first off like something that you can talk to someone about. You can say, oh, I really like implementing this because I wanted to do something real time with my friends. So like that type of like energy is preferable over like a really technically impressive project using Docker, et cetera, and a bunch of technologies. Yeah. Any other questions?
So going from like not knowing rules and nothing, how did you begin that snowball effect? Like what would be the best tips you have?
Best tip. The best tip is to get involved. So you see me here on stage, like giving a talk. Join clubs. I've been in clubs for all my OSU time. That was like the big thing that kind of separated me from the rest of the people. Because it's like, oh, he's not only just like going through his schoolwork. Okay, maybe he's like his GPA is not as high, but he's showing interest and demonstrated interest in CS. And over time, that's what they care more about versus your 4.0 GPA. So I really recommend just getting involved.
Do you have any imposter syndrome for your Google internship at all?
Oh yeah, imposter syndrome is like a thing I live with. That's actually why I don't have a LinkedIn. I have like the biggest imposter syndrome you'll probably ever see. So yeah, when we're at Cal Hacks too, we're talking to like a bunch of Stanford students. They're like, oh yeah, our pitch is great. Or they're using like some type of AI model. It's like, oh my God. And then at Google, it's like since I did the STEP internship, I basically met everyone in our cohort. And they're all like, oh, I go to CMU, I go to NYU, USC, and they're all like super smart. They did like IOI or US ACO. So it's like stuff like that kind of gave me imposter syndrome. But the way I counteract it is that really we go to a state university, but once you get these internships, you're kind of all in the same place. It's kind of funny. I joke with my friends back home in Florida, they had to get like the 4.0s to get like into like a top school, Georgia Tech. I'm just like, oh, I have a 2.7 in college and we still ended up at the same place. So it's kind of one of those things, like, even if you're not as like, I want to say educationally cracked, you can still like defeat the imposter syndrome by being in the same place, in the same rooms, in the same conversations.
So would you say you're, so even now, when you are extremely skilled
No.
at front-end stuff in particular, but also everything, you still, like, you're going to your Tesla, you're still like somewhat concerned that you're gonna not know what you're supposed to be doing or whatever?
Not really. It's kind of funny because as I've gotten older, especially like going through the degree, I like to say like operating systems changes everyone. It's kind of funny in the sense that like no matter how smart you think you are, and it's funny because I've talked to Will about something like this too, like randomly he was asking me about like resume advice. I'm like, even if you've like cured world hunger, like at the end of the day, like once you get to like that interview, all that matters is like how you do. And like I don't care if you have like a 4, I don't care if you won like IOI. Like yeah, that'll get you the interview, but like to kill the imposter syndrome, it's like you have to know yourself at heart, and that's a big thing. Like so, going to Tesla, I'm really just thinking about like all the stuff I've done, all the things I do, so I don't really have to worry about imposter syndrome anymore.
Good.
What? Yeah. Any other questions, Peter?
I was gonna say, like, hypothetically, let's say like an undergraduate student, or like not undergraduate, underclass, be like, at first ever interview, we talked about doing mock interviews, how might you find like a friend or someone who's like able to mock it, like, you know, sometimes your interviewer has to be confident enough, but how do you find this?
Yeah, for sure. A big thing is just like honestly going through the college experience. So go to like the club meetings, go to that frat party with your CS friend group, you know, just like kind of doing the motions, because that's how you, at the end of the day, like forget the CS and all the interviews, internships. It's really just like we're people. So I think connecting with people first and then introducing them to that once you like connected is a great way to find people as an underclassmen.
What teacher should I forecast?
Forecast Rob Hess and Mike Bailey. Any of those two professors, any class with them is going to be like one of your favorite classes. I guarantee it.
Roger.
And Roger too, but Roger teaches more like systems programming related courses. So like if you're like, yeah, OS2. So if you're like me and hate like assembly, Roger might scare you. But yeah. Any other last minute questions? Cool. Thank you guys for having me. Cool. And then feel free to come up to me if you have any questions. I'll be here.